Hi, I'm Sheila Kuehl, and I'm your host for Get Used to It. As you probably know, I hope, because you watch the show every minute of your lives, this is a discussion show about issues of interest in the gay and lesbian community, to our community, but I hope to everybody else as well. You may also know, because we've seen a lot, especially over the past several months, about how the right wing has been more and more using images in order to sell their point of view. The gay agenda video was distributed to everybody in Congress and judges and all kinds of opinion makers, and gay rights, special rights, supposedly, films about our community. We all know these are not films about our community. And in order to fight back, we are seeing a number of films that tell the truth about our community. And I have two filmmakers here with me today to talk about why we even use this kind of imagery and media work in order to tell the truth about our community, and also to give you some examples. My guests are Dr. Dee Mosbacher, who is a physician and a filmmaker, who's made several award-winning films, including Straight from the Heart, and the one that we're going to look at a little bit today, All God's Children. Welcome, Dee.
Thank you.
Happy to have you here.
Thanks.
And Dr. Sylvia Rhue. Gee, everybody's a doctor here but me. I guess I'm a doctor too, right? Who is a counselor, mental health professional, and filmmaker. Worked at the Gay and Lesbian Community Services Center here in Los Angeles, and their counseling center. Long history, both of these women, of activism in our community. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Sheila.
Dee, I'm interested in, I think everybody wants to know when we first start out on a show like this, well, who are these people? You know, we just heard their epithets. But tell me a little bit about your background and what brought you into the notion of filmmaking as a way of working for our community.
Well, I've often, occasionally in the last, particularly the last several elections, wondered if I was adopted, because my family are all very very proud and active Republicans, although perhaps not so proud of the party as it is now, because I don't think they really identify as.
Well, I think Mosbacher's a familiar name, isn't it? Just your father, though.
Yes, he was the head of commerce under President Bush, and has run a lot of the campaigns for the Republican National Party, and he and my brother are very, very active in politics, and my sisters are somewhat active as well, but all as Republicans. So I am not a Republican. I always feel I have to do that disclaimer these days, particularly. But I've really been an activist for a very long time, and sort of way back in the era of the Vietnam War, and then as Stonewall happened, and we started to come out as a movement, I became active in the gay and lesbian movement. But then went to medical school in 1979, started in medical school, and thought that I would put my activism and myself back in the closet for a little bit, because I thought I really needed to, I needed to stop this political stuff and just study medicine. And I just found I couldn't do it because there was so much homophobia in the school. So one of the things I did during my tenure as a medical student was to make actually a slide tape presentation that we turned into a video that's been used in medical schools all across the country to talk about the issues of homophobia in medicine, and to train young physicians and medical students about how to deal and work sensitively with gay and lesbian patients.
So you did a slideshow to illustrate that?
Yeah.
Because you probably discovered going one-to-one was not going to...
Say again?
Going one person at a time was probably not going to get the message across.
Right, exactly. And there was, I was active when I decided I had to be active. I was very active in the American Medical Student Association as a trustee at large. And one of the things I would do is travel around the country to different medical schools, and I won't forget going to Oklahoma, University of Oklahoma Medical School, and saying, you know, we're not like even Houston or New York or any of those places. We don't have the people who are not, the gay and lesbian folks, even in the community, who are not afraid to be out and come and speak at something like this. And that was kind of my inspiration for doing the slide tape presentation. And it is the voices of physicians and lesbian and gay medical students, physicians, talking about their experience and talking about how they think it's best to work with gay and lesbian patients and clients.
Well, you've clearly chosen the documentary format
Yes.
as opposed to a fiction one.
Yes.
And you did a show, I mean, a film about athletics?
Yes, on homophobia in sports, yes, in women's sports. And I'm actually just in the process of trying to raise money to do a companion piece on homophobia in men's sports. I've interviewed Greg Louganis and hope to interview some more folks as well.
So how'd you get to Straight from the Heart? Tell us a little about that.
Well, I was in the middle, actually, of making Out for a Change, which is the homophobia in women's sports, and I saw and was completely inspired by the gay agenda. I was so upset when I saw it. I thought it was very slick, very effective, of course, full of lies and distortions. And I got really depressed, and then I thought, no, you know, got to do something about this, or I could be really depressed, or I could do something about it, and I decided to do something about it, and talked to award-winning filmmaker Frances Reed, and together we made the film, and it ended up being the first pro-gay. You talked about the gay agenda being distributed among at the Congress, and this was Straight from the Heart was the first pro-gay lesbian film that was shown to an audience of senators and congresspeople, bipartisan audience.
And the Academy got to view it too.
That's right. Yeah, it was nominated for an Academy Award as well.
So Sylvia, how did you get involved in this video work? Not just what Dee has done, but from your sort of your own path.
Through going to the Institute for the Advanced Study of Human Sexuality, part of becoming a sexologist was to look at all kinds of sex educational films, and I would say 95% of them were rotten. They're just boring and terrible, and I said, oh, I know I can do better than this. So I decided to start doing my own films, not necessarily sex education films, but more of the documentary about African American lesbian and gay people. And I convinced them to have, as part of my dissertation work, to do a video on black lesbians, and then I done others, like for the Black Gay and Lesbian Leadership Forum, We Have a Legacy, which is a history of historical and contemporary African American lesbian and gay people. And so I've been in video for 10 years actually as a producer, and you know, from beginning to end, from pre-production, production, editing, but I've also been an activist for about 20 years, starting with working with Dr. Martin Luther King. I was part of his welcoming committee to Los Angeles in the 60s. I was a high school student, and my friends and I would take off from school and go meet him at the airport, and we were actually were able to spend time with him, and he wrote us a letter, and then we'd raise money for him, and then of course the women's movement, and then getting more involved with the movement for equal rights for lesbian and gay people.
Well, it's interesting to me that you're both mental health professionals who've decided that, in addition to your own individual work with, you know, with clients or patients, that there's something more that you want to do, but there's got to be a connection. Why imagery? Why, you know, why film? What is it about it that you feel is a more effective way to do your movement work than, I don't know, being the executive director of the center or making a speech at a rally, all of which I know you could do as well? I mean, why film?
Well, you asked first about the connection between being mental health workers, and I think the connection for me is, and being an activist and using film, the connection for me is seeing people who have been so harmed by the rhetoric of the radical right, and reading about people, and then eventually interviewing people who had been really harmed, people who almost killed themselves and made it through, and of course we all know of people who didn't make it through. So that touched me very deeply as a psychiatrist, and as a person who, I guess my sort of overriding principle, if I had one, would be fairness, and it really touched me in that way. And I grew up as, you know, television really became, you know, came into being about the time I did. So I grew up with it, and I know how powerful it can be and how it can touch people. And I think what we've done with this is make something that can touch people, but also that can start a conversation about these kinds of issues that are difficult to deal with. And sometimes you can't find the people who can, you know, sit there in front of a large group of folks and say it so eloquently, or bring up the hard questions that need to be brought up. But if
So this is a way of shaping the message,
exactly right, exactly
through those
right.
images,
Yes.
but they're real images. I mean, that's what
Absolutely.
the documentary sort of has over everything else.
Absolutely.
Is
Yeah.
that it's real.
Yes. Yes.
And
For me, in terms of, I am also a licensed clinical social worker, and I was the assistant director of counseling at the center. So I'm the person who read everyone's history, because I had to make the decision as to which counselor they would see. And I've read all the horror stories, and over the 5 years I've read thousands of people's histories, life histories about what had happened to them in terms of dealing with their orientation, coming out, people being kids thrown through the window onto the front lawn, not just being said get out, but thrown through the window, or just kind of things that you don't even want to hear about. They're so devastating. And the levels of pathology that people either incorporate into themselves, or because of what society and their families and the church has put on them, and to really see it face to face, read it, see the people, and see the consequences of the kind of distortions and hate and the images that are out there that really tell lies about us.
And the
to be able
images
to
are
do something
powerful
about
too.
that.
I mean, you were
Very
saying
powerful.
something today about television and how it works.
Yeah, what most people don't know is with film, you're actually seeing a picture that has already been formed, and then it goes into your brain, and you're able to process it in a certain way with film. But with television, your brain is seeing dots, and they get reassembled in your brain, and they go even deeper into your consciousness, but bypass some of the screening that goes on with film and other pictures. So we really don't know, or we're just learning some of the detrimental consequences of how television affects us internally and can go to the more primitive parts of our emotions and affect us deeply.
Well, it's interesting then to use this as a tool to combat, because fear and discrimination is really part of the same thing. I mean, it's at a level where you sometimes don't get at it with just logical,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
sit down.
You don't get at it
exactly.
logically
We're not
because
on-
they didn't
Exactly.
come to it logically.
Right, and it's
right.
somewhere that a lot of people
right.
don't even know where it's at. if you know what I
Exactly.
mean.
Yeah.
To have
Exactly.
to take it out and examine it, you first have to say, it's like coming out to yourself about being
Exactly
a bigot.
right,
You know,
yeah.
you have to find it.
Yes.
And it's in there, and so I would
Yes.
assume choosing to get at it through these images, it's almost like a shortcut that you don't get with just intellectual
Right. Another thing in terms
conversation.
of art, you know, one definition I read about art is that the purpose of art is to make the comfortable uncomfortable and to make the uncomfortable comfortable. Heterosexism is comfortable, and homophobia or dealing with sexuality is sometimes very uncomfortable. And so if you use art to make people more I guess calm and sane, and at least trying to discuss it instead of going crazy as some people do, I think that's very helpful, and that's a very good use of art.
Yeah, and I think that's what we are trying to do. I talked about using this as sort of a starting point for a conversation about what is obviously a very difficult issue, and that is homophobia and heterosexism. And we purposefully made them both under 30 minutes, so people could sit, people with, like most of us, with a short attention span, and sit. And then what we want to do is go around the country and actually train local activists how to sit with those folks, watch the film, and then facilitate a really meaningful discussion about people's fears and concerns.
Well, let's talk about All God's Children for a minute, and in that, or for more than a minute actually, for lots of minutes, in that context. Because we had heard, and I guess there's some evidence through their film, that the right wing was very cynically targeting black churches for homophobic, education, I suppose they would call it if they were Nazis. And as to really, I think, as you indicated to me, to drive a wedge between that very important aspect of the black community and the black community itself and our community. I think recognizing the really close relationship in terms of the civil rights issues. But so is All God's Children a kind of a response to that, or tell me how it kind of came about?
Well, we had done Straight from the Heart, and it had been pretty successful in terms of people's perception of it, and out there was just this cry from the front lines about needing something that we could take to the African American church-going community, as Straight from the Heart was for the white church-going community. When we first started doing Straight from the Heart, I think I had the fantasy that it could be all things to all people, and quickly got that, even though we have an African-American family in Straight from the Heart, the issues and the communities are in many ways so different that we really couldn't, we couldn't make it all things to all people. So actually, Melinda Paras, executive director of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, approached me and said, you could do this film, and I said, I'm white.
Hello. And
I was really anxious about it, but I talked with some sort of, I think, real role models for me. Mandy Carter, who's just a wonderful organizer, Deborah Johnson, who was then co-chair of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, and other African American women and men, lesbians and gays, who said, go for it, go for it. You can make it happen. We've been trying to make it happen for years, and it hasn't happened. So the luckiest day of my life was when Deborah suggested that I contact Sylvia and talk to her, and it's just been the greatest association for me, and she's just been an inspiration to work with. So I'm just...
Well, see, aren't you glad you're here? Where do you
She
get
knows.
this
I have it on tape.
She knows, that's right, that's right.
So how did you decide to structure this this film so that it would achieve really what you came to want it to do?
I'd really have to say, and Dee, I don't know if you'll agree or not, but it kind of dictated itself in a lot of ways of how it got structured. First of all, in terms of white churches and black churches, I always point out that it is a reality that 11 o'clock on Sunday is still the most segregated hour in the United States. And there's a reason for that, and that's why one size does not fit all. So as when we first started, Sheila, we had no idea that anyone would talk to us. We had no idea if any minister would speak to us. And what we found was doors open, swung wide open. I mean, people welcomed us with open arms. The minister said, we need a tool, give us a tool. And it was just incredible how it all worked, and how it gets structured. Well, one of the main things is the use of the music was very important, and how you utilize it. So when I knew about Lavender Light Choir, the Lavender Light Choir in New York, and we got one of their CDs, and when I heard all I've Been Buked, I knew that was going to be part of the centerpiece of which to structure the film around.
So that's an aspect as well, I think, of getting right to people beyond sort of going through their head. Because music is clearly one piece of that. I mean, you hear music, and especially, I mean, you need to talk about this.
Especially if you're talking about African American
and music,
especially churched people. That the music is the way. I mean, we just know how important that is. A lot of people go to church to hear the music, and the minister may not be that great a draw, but if the choir is good, they will be there, And people who leave the church miss the music. I know. I was raised a fundamentalist in a black church, of course, and I missed the music, and actually it's because of going through this process I rejoined actually First AME Church here in Los Angeles with Reverend Murray, who is one of the centerpieces of the film, because he and his church welcomed me. They were so incredible, and now I have a church home and 5 choirs.
But there's another, and go ahead.
And that's how it got started. I mean, that's how we start the film as well, with the story of the Lavender Light Choir, because their story is so many people's story of being disaffected and sort of disowned and having to leave the church because of their experience of heterosexism and homophobia. So they found a sort of a spiritual home in Lavender Light, and also with Unity Fellowship Church as well. I mean, that is predominantly African American lesbian and gay church. I mean, people have found a home where they didn't have one. So I guess what we kind of want to do is in both the white and black churches allow people to be able to go home again if that's what they want to do.
Well, I know when you were talking to ministers that a lot of the people interviewed in the film are ministers, and especially ministers that people respect and know, and it's almost as though, well, they say it, so that makes us okay. It's, you know, it is authority and it is leadership. That's what leadership is. But you've used other people from the community as well to speak. I want to show a clip of Marjorie Hill, but maybe you can tell a little about who she is before the folks see her.
Do you want me to?
Yeah.
It's Dr. Marjorie Hill. She's a psychologist. She was probably the first openly lesbian psychologist president of the Black Psychologists. And she was Mayor David Dinkins' liaison to the lesbian and gay community. And she has a great history of activism as an open lesbian, and has done just incredible work. And she is one of the linchpins of the film, too. I mean, people always respond to some of the things she says. And you just see how strikingly both beautiful and brilliant she is. And that really comes through with her personality and the things she says. And it works.
Well, let's take a look at Dr. Marjorie Hill.
I just want to say, I am your sister. I am the little girl next door. I am the older woman next door. I am the neighbor, the person on the subway, the person who plants their garden next to your garden. That gay and lesbian African Americans are intertwined throughout our community. And we need the church.
See what I tell you. We'll have more in just a couple of minutes from All God's Children. I see what you mean about the music. I mean, it's a very important thing, but there's really more to it in a way, because you've used music all through the film. It's not just so that people feel good. There's something more
Well, we
to it.
interweave the music and stories, and the music also plays upon, it's an underlying theme of what we're trying to say in terms of, for instance, I've Been Buked. We use spirituals and gospel. Spirituals are coded forms of communication that everyone who's not in the church culture of African Americans may not get. And that's the point, that was the point for 250 years, for the dominant culture not to understand what they were saying. Spirituals are slave songs from the slave experience, and the majority of them were about escaping, getting away, about pain and suffering, and about how things would be in another life. And with I've Been Buked, it dovetails on the experience of lesbian and gay people in terms of having been rebuked and talked about and scorned and thrown out, yet not giving up their faith. And it's just, you cannot, that's really the best way to get to that particular culture, is through the music. And there is other music that we put in there purposely, and the way we did it, and interwoven, edited in. So you're having a tapestry and an unfolding of a story that is I don't know. I think that's why it won 2 awards with the Black Arts Festival and the Black International Cinema, because they got it. They knew what we were trying to say. And it's not that other people don't get it, because white audiences applaud, but it's just that I've been told about how African Americans say, oh, I see what you did, how you interwove the story and the gospel music and what you're trying to say and who did it, and that it really makes for something that's not just culturally relevant, but culturally literate and culturally respectful. We respect the masonry, you know, of what we built on, and respectful of what gospel and spiritual music is.
It's also a very powerful message. I mean, music is powerful anyway because it goes through those screens that you might have. You don't think about music. Music just gets in. But the other thing is, it's the message from the black community in the music was we're equal. We're as all God's children.
Was tolerance and acceptance,
are made by God and are good.
Right.
And now that message comes back to them about gays and lesbians in a way that says, okay, yes. And it is very powerful. It's also very powerful, I think, the way you've used examples of people who are, as I said, opinion makers or models from the communities. This must be a meant to be kind of thing. I mean, the structure
well, it's
of
the first time in history that African American leaders, heroes, have said it's okay to be gay. That it's a historical first on that point.
So, what do you think happens to people when they listen to?
Well, I can tell you what the audience, people who've looked at it, have said to me. They said, these are people my mother would listen to. These are people my parents respect. This is a film I can take home and show it to them. And that's very powerful. And they say it with tears in their eyes very often.
You took one of your movies home, didn't you, Dee?
Yes, I did, as a matter of fact, the last time
home.
around. Yeah, I did. I took, it had sort of a rough go of it 4 years ago when I'd been very out and really criticizing the Republican Party for their anti-lesbian and gay rhetoric and their mouthing family values, but really espousing hate and violence. And so we were, my father's and my relationship was on the mend, definitely, after the election, but it really, I think, taking Straight from the Heart home was kind of a watershed in a way. It was actually, as it happened, I was speaking in Houston with the film, and it was very well received in Houston. It happened to be on his birthday, and he came.
Happy birthday, Dad!
Yeah,
Guess
he
who's
came
coming
home.
to dinner?
Right, exactly. He came home. He'd actually been out of town. Came home and saw it, watched it with tears in his eyes, and after said one thing that kind of tickled me, which was he said it was so powerful and moving. Where on earth did you get all those great actors? And I said, Dad, that's life, not art. But it's art, but it's also life. So he was shocked. Also he said, you know, I really understand now that you really are just asking for equal rights, nothing special. And I was thrilled that that message had come through loud and clear from the film, but also a little disturbed that it hadn't come through loud and clear before. But
well, but that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting even in your own family, where it's you, it's your message, you've been saying it, it's my life, and instead you say, Dad, sit down and watch this movie together with me, and then it gets in a place that even talking to your own family doesn't get in.
Right, and maybe clearly it was able to say some things that I either wasn't able to or wasn't able to get across in a way that could be heard and felt in the way that the film was.
Well, there's some real people too in your film, in All God's Children.
Yeah.
So there's the choice of role models from the community, especially civil rights leaders or people who are so respected. Maxine Waters,
Jesse
Carol
Jackson.
Mosley Braun,
Reverend
Jesse Jackson, each of them hammering home the notion that this is civil rights too. Gay and lesbian rights are civil rights too. Why is that important, do you think, to the black community to use those particular role models?
Well, like I said, because it is historical, we have never seen this before. We, you know, we're raised in the same culture that everyone else is, and, you know, we're told, too, that no one important likes us, and that means your own leaders. And when you have a lot of the religious right, the far right, giving homophobic black ministers checks for $500,000 to be even more homophobic, and they get in the press and they get news and they get quoted, then you might think that, gee, they're right, you know, the church hates us. And here we are saying, no, that's not true. In fact, I would say the majority of definitely the majority of the politicians, because the Congressional Black Caucus has been the most progressive on lesbian and gay rights consistently in their voting record. And that's very important to know. And another thing is that African Americans own the civil rights movement. And if black people say this is not a civil rights movement, you lesbian and gay people out there, then it's not. But if African Americans say it is, and they have in this film, then we also have the moral authority to say we are a legitimate civil rights movement. And that's one of the bottom lines of this film, to get that point across, because then the homophobic ministers cannot say you're not a civil rights movement. We can say, no, the civil rights leaders who've been in it with Martin Luther King from the beginning are saying you're wrong. It is a legitimate civil rights movement.
Well, I thought you also had a wonderful piece in there that Cornel West did. I mean, here's your intellectual leader. Here's the man who's dialoguing with the Jewish community.
Yes.
I mean, you know, with Michael Lerner and his dialogues and books, etc., who is so authentic about the intellectual content, really, of civil rights and the experience of equality.
Yes.
So I want to show that piece, that Cornel West piece, and then ask you to tell me what you think of it. So take a look at Dr. Cornel West.
Well, if I have one word for fellow Christians, I would ask them to keep their eyes on the love of Jesus and to not confuse the blood at Calvary with the Kool-Aid of the homophobia in America. Because Kool-Aid is thin and shallow, and it's linked to scapegoating, and it's linked to trashing other people. But the blood, as thick as it is open enough for everybody. And by being open enough to everybody, it means that we have to call into question our own particular prejudices that we inherit that have nothing to do with the loving gospel of Jesus. And I think that's a challenge to the black church. And it's a challenge that is at work. I mean, it's a challenge for the country as a whole in the world, but it's a challenge for the black church precisely because we've got too many black folk who are suffering because of the inability to talk about sexuality. And we have too many black gay brothers and lesbian sisters who are suffering because of the petty prejudices that lead us to lose sight of their humanity and therefore our support and our embrace and our welcome.
Don't you wish you could talk like that? That's just so fine. Now, what do you think was going on with the, why did you choose that 60-second piece for the film?
Because that was actually a sermon. There was a 60-second sermon that I call an African-centered critique of European thought and behavior, which is he uses so brilliantly what I call the apex of Western Christian theology, using Christ and the love of Jesus and the nadir of Western civilization, Kool-Aid, in a rather illiterate Christ and Kool-Aid juxtaposition of the two in terms of showing what is the good and what is not, and not to do it. And it was just brilliant.
Well, it's wonderful, the sort of the interweaving, as we talked about, the sort of the role models, messages about how gay and lesbian rights are truly civil rights, the messages in the music, but there's a whole nother piece that weaves through the film that has to do the same with Straight from the Heart, with what is really the essence of the documentary style, I think, and that is real people talking about themselves, their feelings, etc. Tell me a little about some of the pieces or the people that you chose to do that piece of it and how you wanted to use that.
Well, I think a number of them kind of bordered on, I mean, the real people I sort of tend, I think one of the reasons I like doing documentaries is that I think real people are heroes, and sort of, I just, and I think we interviewed a number of them who are both real people and role models, like Phil Wilson, the founder, one of the founders of the Black Gay and Lesbian Leadership Forum, and his family, you know, who were just wonderfully open and accepting. And just a couple of families of folks who, as it happened, were two men who died of AIDS, who came out to their family, and whose family dealt very sensitively, I think, with the issue, and in different ways that we wanted to, you know, that we wanted to talk about on the film. And then the other person, again, sort of the border between hero and role model and real person, is Linda Villarosa and her mom, who I think just did this wonderful thing in coming out in Essence magazine as Mrs. Villarosa coming out as a mom, and Linda coming out as a lesbian, and you know, they're just had wonderful things to say, and you could see the love, and that's what, you know, we hope and we think, because we see the tears, that gets through to folks in a way that you know, in a way that the heroes don't, you know, because it's a little bit more impersonal and intellectualized.
Well, it's much more, I mean, I know that there's a lot of emotional impact when a leader says to me, do your best, you know, be your best, get rid of your hatred or bigotry, etc. And it does an enormous amount for my soul when music gets into it. But I think of the three kind of elements of this, that the stories that of real people just talking about, and I don't mean we're not all real if we're role models or musicians, but talking about their experience. Now maybe it's because I'm just so sentimental, and
Me
but
too.
that gets to me because I can identify so directly with some piece of what they say. And I'm assuming that's why you even choose the documentary style. Tell me, if you can, though, some of the responses that you've gotten from people who've seen the film and what they respond to.
Sylvia, you've got some great stories from...
Oh, yeah. Just when you, by the time they get to Joseph Beam's mom, Dorothy Beam, and using Mahalia Jackson, and also the Beale family talking about their son, that's when we've noticed that we've been criticized for not having enough tissue in the room.
That was our feedback, right? We
Right. They said the only thing wrong with it, you're not supplying tissue, because if people are crying at that point, then you know, it's just, they were beautiful people giving a story of such love and heartfelt feeling that, and people really identify with that. And I think really we get most of the feedback on the parents and what they said about the parents and their sons, and then of course adding Mahalia Jackson singing "There Is a Balm in Gilead." I mean, it's something there are certain scenes in the film that I can watch 1,000 times myself.
Well, how about 1001?
Okay.
Let's take a look at that scene.
If I had known my son would have only lived 33 years, I would have been out there on a soapbox saying, this is my son. He's gay, but he's good. He's kind. He's well learned. This is my son. I would have done that. So what I do now, everywhere I go, I carry papers in my bag. This is my son. He was gay. He died of AIDS at 33, but he was a wonderful young man. And I elaborate on all the wonderful things that he has done in his life. And everybody says, how can you do that? How can you do that? Because he was mine, and I birthed him, and I brought him in the world, and I loved him unconditionally.
Is a balm in Gilead.
Joe Beam was a poet, he was a lecturer, he was a writer, he was a singer.
To make the wounded whole.
But after my son died, and the cause was so severe out here, I asked the Lord to help me to get out and speak to people. And now I go out, I speak at churches, I speak at meetings, I speak anywhere that anybody will ask me to come, I go and speak. And when I go out to speak, I say to them, love your child, love your daughter, love your son, unconditionally.
So here, we don't want to be accused of not having enough Kleenex here. That was wonderful. That was just wonderful. Now, tell me, how do we use this film now? Where is this film going, and what are you doing with it?
Well, as I said in the beginning, I mean, I think the most important thing about this is it's a way to start a discussion. And what we've got in mind is to get it in, and heart, is to get it into as many, particularly churches, church communities as possible around the country. And to that end, we're going around the country doing community showings, but more importantly, we're recruiting local African American and white activists to come together to learn how to use both Straight from the Heart and All God's Children in their local church communities, and how to take it in, how to lead that discussion, and how to do the follow-up in terms of, you know, really starting to change people's hearts and minds.
I'm on a 20-city tour right now, taking it around, premiering it, and doing some trainings to deal with doing anti-homophobia work in the church, and talking about some of the most pithy issues that people are dealing with. What we found is that people really fear losing their faith. They fear losing the Bible. They fear losing their God. And we're saying, you don't have to do that. And it's really just a matter of come, let us reason together and talk about it. And if you want me to, I can run down something really quick.
Sure.
Give you an idea of what I cover in terms of like when we talk about the Bible, especially with black people, it comes down to what they've been taught about the Bible. That's like the bottom line. And I say, okay, which Bible? Because most people don't know that there are 105 different Bibles printed in English. And most people will say, well, the King James Version. Well, that's 66 books, 31,176 verses, of which .0002 have been interpreted as being about homosexuality. And when you break those down, they're not really. You've got one Levitical law in Leviticus of 617 that most people, and maybe Orthodox Jews, subscribe to, but most Christians don't. A story that has nothing to do with homosexuality. And one man in the New Testament, Paul, who called himself the chief of all sinners, and I say, who died on the cross, Christ or Paul? So I just run it down, and then we can go into it.
Well, it's provocative. Religion is another thing that exists inside people's character in a way that it's also very difficult to get at. I mean, it's funny how, and I can see why as mental health professionals, this would be something you would be interested in addition to the fact that you both experience homophobia.
How do you get to those deeply held beliefs?
Yeah, because I don't even know everything that I believe until I'm called upon to take it out and look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I
but they're deeply held feelings.
Absolutely.
And that's part of the point. You do not, if you want to be homophobic, but don't hit us in the head, don't bash us. Can we ask you not to vote against us? Bottom line things. We don't need everyone to not be homophobic. We don't need every 100% of the votes. We need 51% of the votes, and we need people to be comfortable with they have to deal with their own theology and denominational beliefs in their own way, and we respect that, and we give them the space to do that. But we also need to give them some basic information. You got to remember, Sheila, a lot of Americans think that Christ spoke English.
That's right.
That the Bible was written in English, and one Texas legislator even said, and when he's trying to pass an English-only law, said, well, if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for us. And we're dealing with people who have that kind of feelings and ideas about the Bible, and not everyone is that unsophisticated, but I can out-Bible and out-verse any of them. So,
you know, the other thing that you said, too, really struck me, and that is, I know that one of the ways that society tries to make certain that we won't be gay or lesbian, to keep us from even admitting or living in that part of ourselves, is to punish us for doing it. punish us when we come out, and we imagine that we will be punished by everyone before we come out. You know, our family will disown us, and that does happen to a lot. And as you said, it's not just that you will lose your religion if you come out from our side of the equation, but that you run an enormous risk of losing, especially in the African American community, this real center of spirituality, social life, and really sort of community meaning. And it is a real thing. I mean, the choir forming itself because they could not be part of their own churches, and so many people telling the story that they were kicked out. And this is a way of saying, hopefully, to a congregation or a church, you don't need to expel your children, and you shouldn't.
Absolutely.
That is not what God.
And if you did, you would have a pretty empty and songless church, even silent church.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, if we had a day where all the lesbians and gays stood up and walked out of their churches and came out, they would be pretty empty, probably not terribly well funded, may even lack preachers, and certainly would lack choir members and directors and organ players and stuff like that. I mean, if we could get people to really start having this discussion and realize, the resources, the enormous losses that they've already taken and that they could take,
Well, it is a terrible loss, but but homophobia doesn't care about the loss to society and doesn't care about the damage that it does. The interesting thing to me is that good people do care, and that's why I think the film is so powerful. Is that your own hope that people will see it and say, maybe I want to explore again why I believe that and whether that's a good thing. So you're going all around the country.
That's right.
And now I know that people are watching this in parts of the country that you may not even have planned to go to. Honolulu, for instance. I don't know if you're going there. But how would people find this film? We'll show a phone number
yes,
at the end?
Absolutely. There's an 800
call?
number that people can call to get that, and or Straight from the Heart, or the Homophobia in Sports film as well.
So what's next for you both?
Well, now it's my job to not just premiere it, but go into the churches and the historically black colleges and universities to deal with these subjects, and not just historically black, but that's going to be the thrust. We are actually just scheduled right now to go to Dartmouth and Princeton and present these and have workshops and training sessions and to talk about it. And I've been asked to come to Atlanta for King Week, to be there a whole week, and go to Spelman and Morehouse and Emory.
Great.
And we just, I'm booked till March, and now people have started talking about March. So we really are going to get this out there and have people at least address it and talk about it.
It really is a dream, and another dream that I have is to really, in bringing together activists in the community, to be trained about using these films, to also take the opportunity to bring black and white activists together, because I think we are still, in my personal opinion, way too segregated as well. And I think, it's something that we could get together and share in terms of a common purpose and goal, and maybe make some inroads in terms of our own racism in the white lesbian and gay community as well. And I hope that happens, and so that's a corollary to what we want to be doing, or actually really one of the central things that we want to be doing.
Well, in that respect, you're both role models as well. I mean, it's interesting. I do try to do the same thing with this show in a way that you were talking about, and that is that people that see you hopefully think about their own ability to be activists. I'm sure none of us set out and said, gee, I'm 7 years old and what I want to be when I grow up is a gay and lesbian activist. But the way you've chosen to do it is also, I think, inspirational, because I'll bet you there are a lot of people out there with video cameras who have a notion that it's a very powerful way to say something. And it's almost like an extension of your own personality, a way to extend your own personal message by capturing something and showing it. And I think that it probably is what drew you as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a real opportunity to go where we otherwise couldn't go or wouldn't go. So, yeah.
Well, I'm I'm very happy that you were on the show. I'm happy that we got to see several pieces of All God's Children. I hope that people get to see Straight from the Heart as well, and all the work that you will do in the future. Remind people, if they want to get hold of you, there's going to be a phone number, so you should go get a pen and paper right now, because I'm going to thank Dr. D. Mosbacher, Dr. Sylvia Rhue, and this is Dr. Sheila Kuehl signing off. And remember, now you're not even safe in your own church. You're going to have to watch these films and get used to it.